In this special series of Afternoon Light, you'll hear from participants in our Menzies Early Career Network, a program for university students to learn, research, publish on a topic of Australian contemporary history and liberal thought. The students' essays will be published in a new book, Menzies Rediscovered, a new generation's inspiration for political philosophy, domestic challenges and foreign affairs, in March 2026. Today I'm joined by Pablo Avaria, who, as part of the Menzies Early Career Network, wrote an essay on Blueprint for Middle Power Statecraft. Pablo has completed his MBA at Monash University and in 2025 was a student in the program for leadership development at Harvard Business School. Welcome to Afternoon Light, Pablo.
Thank you so much for having me, Georgina.
That's a pleasure. Now tell me, why did you want to participate in the Menzies Early Career Network?
Yeah, so I was really drawn to the program because from the previous cohort, my good friend Georgia Loudon was a part of it and she had many good things to say. And because it sits at the intersection of history and policy, and I wanted to focus on the strategy side of things of the previous Menzies government. And so this was just a really good opportunity to be able to do some research and delve into those ideas. And it was just amazing to see the outcomes that were done by Menzies himself and how that changes the way the government associates themselves with the US and with Britain and with Japan currently. And so that's what really drew me to the program, to have the opportunity to do that.
Oh, fantastic. Now, why did you choose this topic of how the Menzies government used trade, basically, its economic interests as a tool of statecraft in its engagement in the Pacific?
I chose the topic because nowadays there is such an increase in the influence of the US, and I was interested in finding out where did that come from and when did it start. And of course, it started with the Menzies government. And so I wrote this paper just to see the sort of foundations of the strategy implications that Menzies sort of decided and planted for the future of politics and for our alliance with the US, and how he diplomatically shifted the focus to the US from Japan and Britain. And so, that's why.
It's a really fascinating period for Australia, well, for the world more broadly, the end of World War II and the decline in British power in the Pacific, of course, the end of the British Empire and the emergence of the decolonisation movement across the world, and particularly, of course, in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. How was Australia's relations with Britain changed during that time?
It sort of more started in the 50s area, and it was mainly because from the World Bank loan, and that's when the big shift happened from the reliance on the British and to American just as a financial power. And that paralleled similarly to the defence strategy that Menzies had. And so because it was Australia's first major peacetime engagement with America, it signalled sort of a willingness to step outside the constraints of just Britain and the Sterling area. And so the importance was the economic shift before the formal defence shift of ANZUS, which sequentially was really effective in demonstrating to the US that Australia was prepared to align economically with America, and that future security commitment was more credible from the World Bank loan.
Yeah, I mean, Britain was in a pretty dire economic situation post-World War II. It had obviously spent huge amounts of money defending itself against the threat of Nazi Germany, and there were heavy restrictions on public consumption and a lot of deprivation in British society that sort of flowed to Australia as well. I mean, we had a lot of restrictions still imposed by 1949 that the Menzies government, or the Menzies-led Liberal Party as an opposition, campaigned against and campaigned to lift, which they duly did in 1950 once they were in government. I mean, do you see that as a messaging to the United States that Australia was sort of shifting away from economic alignment with Britain as well to open itself up to the opportunities of American capital, enterprise and investment?
Yes, I definitely do see that. And I also wanted to add where Menzies had to see what was more sustainable economically long term. And so that was the big shift in the sort of change of alignment and more of a priority to the US amidst all the military things that were going on. And so, yes, Britain was investing a lot in war, but then Japan was probably the key here, where the US saw Japan as a recovery to stabilize the Pacific and containing sort of more of a focus on Japan rather than Britain. And so Menzies had seen that by supporting Japan, they more aligned with the US and support the global economy because they were more powerful than Britain. And so it's interesting to see within the international trade and the dollar where everything is sort of shifted tremendously because Britain was seen as a very poor player and not economically sustainable and not visionary as Menzies was.
A real aspiration for the Menzies government was to secure the security treaty with the United States, which it eventually does on the 1st of September 1951 in the ANZUS Treaty, and New Zealand was involved as well. It wasn't easy for Australia to get the US to sign this, and Britain was, of course, opposed to it, or it wanted to be part of it, and that wasn't going to fly with the United States. And Australia certainly wanted this treaty because it was concerned about the threats in the Pacific. How does Australia go about getting the US to sign the ANZUS Treaty? Do you see the importance of Japan there?
Yes, and I think it was because of the bilateral exports and the future exports and investments that was the potential that Menzies saw. And because Japan is closer to Australia, the ability to do that was higher percentage-wise than with Britain due to their economic instability.
Yeah, I think also the United States wanted Australia to do what it called a soft peace treaty with Japan, which was really important, bringing Japan into the sphere of the Western alliance, and to ensure that Japan did not drift off into the hands of the Soviet Union and global communism. So, Australia entering into the soft peace treaty with Japan certainly helped to get ANZUS, as well as entering into the Korean War and sending troops there, which was a Cold War conflict that the United States had a serious interest, of course, in stopping the spread of communism. Do you see the importance of trade and reconciliation with Japan as an essential component of the ANZUS through your research and in your chapter, Pablo?
Yes, I definitely do, because Japan was also in support of helping the US succeed, and Britain wasn't at the forefront of their mind for succeeding. And so Australia, to put themselves as a greater power in the grand scheme of the world, the reconciliation with Japan was definitely essential, especially because of Britain's decline.
Tell me about the importance of Australia's adoption of the decimal currency, which of course ends up being the Australian dollar, not the Australian Royal, and there were a whole lot of names tossed around. Does it signify that we were now economically tied to the US and not to Britain with that introduction? Because, of course, before that we had the pound.
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like the decimal itself is often treated as a technical or administrative reform, but I think it was more deeply symbolic to that, and it had more meaning to it. And so it definitely did mark the point at which Australia stopped structuring itself economically and identifying with Britain and accepted the integration fully into the US-centered global system. And even the debate over the naming of the currency tells its story itself, but the move of the proposal to the dollar reflects a public and political recognition that Australia's economic future really no longer sat in the imperial system. And so by the late 1960s, when Australia chose not to follow the sterling in devaluation, that shift was complete. And so currency became a quiet but powerful expression of strategic alignment with the US, which led to the future prosperity of Menzies and the government.
And also the adoption of the metric system too, from the pounds and ounces to kilos.
Everything changed.
Yeah, milligrams and centimetres, not yards and feet. Much easier mathematically, arithmetically too.
Yeah, definitely it is.
What do you think the lessons for today are in understanding the importance of trade policy?
I think so. The core lesson is that trade is it's never just trade, and it sort of shapes alliances, it signals intent and creates leverage. And so the Menzies era shows that middle powers are not sort of condemned to passivity if they are strategic about how they align economically through their policy with sort of a broader geopolitical objective and vision. And so if you, today, particularly like in the context of AUKUS, our economic relationship with China, the lesson is about sequencing and leverage, and Australia needs to think carefully about how economic decisions reinforce security outcomes. And so rather than treating trade and defence as separate silos, it sort of allows for the success of the Menzies period that came from understanding when Australia could deliver something a great power needed. And in doing so, at the moment, it's what matters most. And so I love the lesson of what happened many, many years ago through Menzies is very, very prominent today.
Yes, I think using economic levers to drive a great power into making a decision that is in your interest was obviously used very effectively by the Menzies government and has been used in more recent years by other Australian governments. There's constraints to being a middle power, but there's also opportunities, and you don't just have to take passively what great powers dictate. You can use your, as I said, your economic levers, the resources you have, your geographic place in the world, and what that offers a great power, as we have done over the years with things like Pine Gap, means that we, they always say, we bat above our weight.
Definitely, I agree. And I feel like being a middle power is great because it allows for the flexibility in alliances in the future as we see now. So absolutely. I'm sort of very grateful to be a middle power.
Well, thank you so much, Pablo. Congratulations on your chapter, and thank you for coming on Afternoon Lunch.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this special series of Afternoon Light, featuring interviews with participants in the 2025 Menzies Early Career Network. To follow more of our work, make sure you subscribe to this podcast and explore our other content at the Robert Menzies Institute website, robertmenziesinstitute.org.au.